Today we're talking about dating. It's fun, it's kind of fun, but sometimes it's not fun. More sidetracked from that, we're talking about, or more specific, not sidetracked. We're talking about what is the point of dating? So, by a raise of hands, what is the point of dating? Somebody? Ella.
Marriage.
That's a good one. Anybody else? Companionship, that's also a good one. What's another one? Is that all we got? Really? Okay. I came up with more answers than you guys did. That's fun. What's that? That is also a good point. Okay. So, the reasons that I came up with dating, because this is what I figured you guys would tell me. The first reason is because you want to learn how to be in a relationship. How many of you think that's a good reason to be dating somebody? Okay, what about being happy? Feeling all of your happy feelings and not being lonely. Who thinks that's a good reason to be dating somebody?
You can be happy.
Okay. Learning how to be in a relationship. Hello. Hi. 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 It's good to see you all today. Okay. Learning how to be in a relationship. Is this a good reason to be dating? You can learn how to be in a relationship outside of a romantic one. The only thing specific to romantic relationships is the physical stuff and having children. It's the only thing specific. You can learn how to be friends, companionship. You can learn how to resolve conflict, all of that outside of a romantic relationship. It is best to learn how to be in relationship with people before you actually get there. Because learning how to have healthy relationship with people is really hard when you have lots of extra feelings involved. It's really difficult because feelings are really big all the time. Okay, being happy. If we try and find our happiness in a relationship or other people, we will be let down because we're all humans and humans suck sometimes and we're not always nice and we let people down because we're people. Yes, ouch. Okay. Jesus is the only one. Jesus is the only one who can fill that desire to be loved. We all have a desire and a want to feel loved and cherished, which is awesome. And it's there for a purpose. It's there because God wants to do that in us. He wants to fill that hole and love us so much that we just are full of joy and happiness and love for other people. Loneliness. If you're in a relationship because you feel lonely, I did this, it was a bad idea. You can be lonely in a relationship really easily. Being in a relationship is not a cure for loneliness. All right. Another reason that it's not a good idea to have your motivation for being in a relationship as being happy is that feelings fade. Ask any of your parents if the happy, lovey, all of the feelings that they had when they got married is still there. They're probably going to say, yeah, that faded like 10 years ago. Yes. Finding your spouse. That is the point. That is the point of dating. Part of dating to find your spouse is being intentional with what you're doing, which I'll talk about more later. All right. So, what did dating look like in the Bible? I'll give you a really short answer. It didn't exist. In the Bible, everybody had an arranged marriage. Your parents decided what you wanted. They didn't care about your feelings. If they did, they were being really nice to you. Because the whole point of you getting married was to help support the clan. Carry on the family, make people to help make food. You need more people to help grow food, tend animals, clean stuff. That was the whole point of getting married. Well, not the whole point. Romantic marriages weren't common until about 300 years ago. Compared to the 5,000 years that the world's been around, feelings have not been wholly involved for a really long time of that. It's not particularly sad, because just because they didn't get married for love in the first place didn't mean that love didn't happen. You think of Abraham and Sarah, they loved each other a lot. They probably had an arranged marriage. I mean, I'm 90% sure that Sarah was Abraham's half-sister. Life was different back then. There were way less people.
Not that much.
There were that less.
Well, there was still.
I'm trying to. Okay. The men made all of the choices in relationships. Your fathers generally said, "Hey, I'm gonna go get you a spouse," or "Hey, son, go find your spouse and go ask your uncle." Do you think about this? Isaac and Rebecca. Isaac's father said, "Hey, go to your uncle Laban and he'll find you a wife." And that's what he did. Isaac and Rebecca loved each other very much. They still had an arranged marriage. I gotta move pages. So, if we can't really look at what dating looked like in the Bible, I want to draw your attention to Genesis chapter 2. If you have a Bible, awesome. If not, go grab one. Genesis chapter 2, because we're going to be talking about the very first marriage. If I can get there. Right. I'm going to read it because we're not going to read the whole chapter, because that'd be a lot. Okay. Genesis chapter 2, starting in verse 7. So, the backstory to this is God just created the earth, and he's creating man. Who do we think the first marriage is? Anybody has a guess? Lauren. Adam and Eve. You are correct. All right. Genesis 2, verse 7 through 9. Then the Lord formed a man from the dust of the ground and breathed into his nostrils the breath of life. And the man became a living being. Now the Lord God planted a garden in the east in Eden, and there he put the man he had formed. The Lord God made all kinds of trees grow out of the ground, trees that were pleasing to the eye and good for food. In the middle of the garden there was a tree of life and the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. Okay. God created Adam. He made him a garden, and he stuck him there. Adam goes on to name all of the animals. And then, in verse 15, God took the man and put him in the Garden of Eden to work it and care for it. And God, and then in verse 20 it says, yes, I'm skipping a whole bunch because I don't want to read about naming the animals. Okay. Verse 15. What? I'm in the wrong chapter. No wonder this is not working for me. All right. Verse 20. So the man gave names to all the livestock, the birds in the sky, and all the wild animals. But for Adam, no suitable helper was found. So the Lord caused the man to fall into a deep sleep. While he was sleeping, he took one of the man's ribs and then closed up the place with flesh. Then the Lord God made a woman from the rib he had taken out of the man, and he brought her to the man. The man said, "This is now bone of my bones, flesh of my flesh, and she shall be called woman, for she was taken out of a man." This is why a man leaves his father and mother and is united to his wife, and now they become one flesh. Adam and his wife were both naked, and they felt no shame. So, this is the first marriage. This is the first marriage in the Bible, and this is how God did it. He created the man. There was no partner for the man, no companion, no one to help and be with him. In some versions, they use the word helpmeet. It's not a helper in, I'm a child and I'm helping mommy do the dishes. It's a helpmeet in that I have strengths and weaknesses, and you have strengths and weaknesses, and we're going to use those together to be a unified force and help and do things together. Does that make sense? No? Yes. Okay. If you have more questions, come ask me later. So, God made a person for Adam. He made someone. They were not perfect people. Once they ate of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, they were not perfect people. I'm sure we all somewhat remember that. They all made mistakes. But Adam had strengths and Eve had strengths. They both had weaknesses. They were made to complement and work together. I'm sure they had arguments, because every single married couple does. Unless you get married and then die 5 seconds later. I promise you will argue. You can totally argue before you get married. Okay. Do we think soulmates exist? Raise of hands, how many of you think that soulmates exist? That is not very many of you. I am of the opinion that God has a person for you. I don't think there's the other half of your soul out there, because the other half, well, there is. His name is Jesus, and he's for everybody. Yeah. There is, some people will never get married. Paul I'm sure you all have heard of Paul. He wrote a couple books. He never got married. There's a verse in 1 Corinthians where he says, "For the widowed and the unmarried, it is better for you to stay that way." So, some of us will never get married. Some of us are called to be that way. But for a good portion of us, God has a person out there for us. I don't think that there's the other half of your soul and personality out there, because we're all imperfect people and we can't fill other people's crevices and cracks. No matter what, whether you get married or you stay unmarried, part of what you need to do outside of any relationship with another human being, you need to find your contentment in Jesus, because we're all human and we all fail and we suck. I suck sometimes too. I am messy and I annoy my husband. I suck too. Yeah. Thanks. Someone might be walking home later. Okay, our next question, or at least the next question in my mind of this topic. Is there a right age to start dating? How many of you think that there is? I didn't start really dating until I was 20. Yes, and that's partially because when I was in high school, I thought all the boys I knew were stupid. It's because we all have underdeveloped brains. Do you have a question? You can come back to me then. So, in my humble opinion, there's not really a right age to start dating. Hello? Marco? Hello. Okay, there we go. There is no real right age to start dating. However, there is a right relationship. How do you know if it is a right relationship? God will tell you. If he doesn't answer, you need to wait a while. It's probably not the right time. How do you know if you ask him? If you ask him and if he gives you, if you choose to ask him and he gives you an answer, if you don't like it, you get to choose if you listen. But that also means that you get to have your consequences of those choices. Just like every choice we make and every answer God gives us, we get to choose. We have free will. When we choose not to listen, we end up getting hurt, or we do both, we end up hurting other people. We choose to listen. When we choose to listen, we need to trust God that he has a good plan for us. He does have a good plan for you, I promise. He tells us so, and he never tells a lie. I was very, very afraid to ask if I would ever get married, because growing up, I wanted to be my mom. My mom got married and had a bunch of kids, and I always wanted to do that. So I was afraid to ask because I didn't want to get told no, because I wanted to get married. I was also afraid to act, I asked God if he wanted me to date Alec, and he said yes, and I didn't want to, because it was scary. It was very scary, because then I had to learn how to be vulnerable and deal with my problems, because there was going to be somebody else who had to deal with them too, and it's not fair to make somebody else deal with your problems if you're not willing to deal with them yourself. But I did, and it turned out really well. This is a very important sentence I'm about to say here. If you have to lie to be in a relationship with someone, romantic or otherwise, it's probably not a good idea. Not if you are lying to your parents, you shouldn't be in a relationship with your parents. If you're lying to your parents, you probably shouldn't do the thing that you're lying about. But if you have to lie to your friends or your parents or yourself to be in a relationship, it's probably not a good and healthy one. I lied to myself sometimes. Who's heard of the word situationship? Yes. I did one of those and it was a really bad time. God told me not to. He told me not to, and I knew it was a bad idea, and I did it anyway because I was lonely and not a healthy person, but I did it anyway. It was a very bad idea, and there was a lot of recovering from that I had to do, and forgiveness asking to do, that I needed to do. I was lying to myself that I was okay. I was lying to my parents and hiding things, and that was not a healthy thing to do. If you're lying to be in a relationship with a friend or romantic, it's probably not a healthy one. Lying about, I'm gonna surprise my friend for my birthday, that's a different thing. But if you're lying to yourself, you're lying because you're hiding something or you feel shameful, you probably need to work that through with Jesus. And it's probably not a healthy relationship. Okay. Siblings are also not the same. You don't just get to not be in sibling relationships because you don't want to tell them where your junk food is. That's not a good plan either. Okay. Feelings involved with your romantic choices. Relationships can't just be based on feelings because, as I said earlier, feelings change. Feelings also have a tendency to lie to us. They're bigger than we think they're bigger than what is true. Feelings are really big and sometimes they're over the top. Feelings are important. Feel your feelings. Do the feeling thing. But don't let feelings drive the bus, because it'll drive you over a cliff really quickly. Not a literal cliff, please. Okay. Things get hard. If you are in any kind of relationship that lasts more than a week or a month, something is going to happen and things are going to get hard. Whether it's friend, family, romance, it gets hard. You're going to argue, your feelings are going to get hurt, something's going to happen. It always does. That's why your feelings cannot drive the bus in relationships. Because your feelings get hurt and then you never want to talk to them again, and then you don't know how to have healthy relationships. If that happened in every romantic relationship you had, you'd never get married. You'd never have a long-term relationship. When thinking about getting into a relationship, what do you do with your feelings? Well, as much as you can, make your choices, make the necessary choices with the logical part of your brain before your feelings get involved, and or have a trusted person to talk things through with. Make sure that this person that you are talking with is a safe person and knows how to have good and healthy relationships. Relationships not just being romantic ones, but friendships as well. Figure out your guidelines and if if you, as much as you possibly can, do this. Because, how many of you have heard the word intimacy? It's a big person word. It's not just your physical selves that is involved in intimacy. It's your brain and your heart and all of your feelings. Emotional intimacy is a really big thing. So, you have to figure out your boundaries and your guidelines. Part of that is, you are all teenagers. Your parents have guidelines for you, I am sure. Being respectful and open and honest with your parents, having conversations with them. Alec asked my parents if he could date me, and I was 21. And I liked that. He was 23 when we got married, 22 when we started dating. I appreciated that because I didn't want to hide my relationships. Figure out what your deal breakers are before you get into relationships. You want someone who is dangerous, or not dangerous, generous? Those are totally different things. Don't date dangerous people, you probably will get hurt. You want to date someone who is generous? You probably don't want people who are skinflints. Or skinflints means never spend any money on anything. Cheap. One of the things that I wanted in a significant other was someone who was mindful with his money, but not stingy. Generous. So figuring out what your deal breakers are, the qualities that you want in your spouse. I forgot my notebook at home, but I found the notebook of the qualities I wanted in a spouse. I wrote them when I was 20, so even a year before Alec and I started dating or even got to know each other. The other thing you want to figure out is keeping yourself safe. You are all teenagers and you are all young. Being safe is important, whether you are teenagers or old. Like me. Yeah.
You're not old.
One good way to do keeping yourself safe is being in community. Be around other people. It's really easy to be safe when you're in a group of people who also want you to be safe. It's really hard to get kidnapped when you're with 10 people. It's the same sentiment. Right. Another really important part of keeping yourself safe is being in relationship with other people outside of your romantic one. If your romantic person is pulling you from your friends, that's not a good thing. That's not a good thing at all. Okay. Part of the reason that you want to, most of the entire reason that you want to do this, figuring out your boundaries and your guidelines before you get into a relationship, is once you're in it, your feelings are really powerful. Hormones, man, they can run the bus if you let them. Don't. Yes, you hormones. There's a reason. So all of you have parents. All of you have parents. It's a biological requirement. One thing that happens when you have a baby, most of the time, you forget everything you went through. The hormones that happen, I hardly remember any of the pain I was in. It was a lot, but I still don't remember it because of all of the hormones. So you get into the moment and your hormones start working. God made them, they're there for a purpose, but it's really hard to draw a line when you're in the middle of your hormones, especially if you haven't decided where the line is. If I decide that my line, or if I don't know where my line is at all, and I somehow get over here, when what is safe is over here, then I have to decide where the line is really fast, or I'm going to go farther than I ever wanted to. Does that make sense? If the safe thing's over here, and you get over here, it's really easy to get way over here without even thinking about it. Partially because when your hormones are raging, you don't think about anything. Yes. Part of boundaries is you decide yours, your significant others decides theirs. Respecting them is really important. If your person isn't respecting your boundaries, they're not a safe person. They are not a safe person at all. If they're not going to respect your boundaries, they don't respect you at all. You are just a thing. Your boundaries are important, and they are what keep you safe and healthy. I have boundaries with my husband. I don't remember what they are at the moment, but I do. I wrote them down yesterday, and I forgot where I put them. I still do things outside of my, I do friend things outside of my marriage. That's really important. That's a boundary. You can't have just me because I am not enough for anybody. So, respecting each other's boundaries is super important because it's caring and loving for them. Okay. Getting advice. How many of you have a friend who likes to give you advice without really asking for it? I have many of them. I don't listen to most of them. So, when you get, Marco. Okay. When you get into, I really don't want to be trying to get your guys' attention. Thank you. Okay. When you need advice, you go to safe people. You go to wise people. Adults are really, most of the time, fantastic. Your youth leaders will probably 99.9% of the time give you good advice. You want you want relationship advice from someone. If they have really short-term, not very good, healthy relationships, they're probably not the person to go to. If I want marriage advice when I'm having struggles with my husband, I'm not going to go to someone who's been divorced like 8 times. That's a bad idea. Because their response is going to be, well, get divorced, because things are hard. It's probably not the greatest idea, because when we're having problems, we have lots of feelings, and our feelings are really big, and most of the time too big. So, go to someone who's got a good, long-term, healthy relationship, romantic or otherwise, because most of our problems, when we're in a relationship, aren't specifically to romance. Because most of the issues, or most things, in relationships, the only thing specific to romantic ones, who remembers what it is? Anybody?
They have sex and then like to have kids.
Physical stuff and having children. Those are the only things that are specific to romantic relationships. So, if the only thing specific to romantic relationships is the physical stuff, you can figure out everything else in every kind of relationship you have. You're arguing. That's not specific to romantic relationships. I argue with my siblings sometimes. I argue with my friends. So, making sure that you go to people with healthy and long-term relationships when you're having problems. I promise you will have problems. I would say, I've been married for almost 3 years. The hardest one of those years was the first. It was the first year of marriage. You hear about the honeymoon phase, everything's wonderful and everybody's happy. It's hard. You're figuring out how to be in a relationship with someone, how to meld your lives together. Especially if you don't live with that person beforehand, it's really hard. You're learning everything about a person in a really small amount of space. Small amount of space. It's a lot. But it's worth it. I wouldn't say it was a bad year. It was just, there were lots of hard things in it because you're learning a lot. And you have to figure out how to communicate with somebody. Everybody's communication styles are different. I am a verbal processor. I talk through my thoughts. It sometimes really bugs my husband. I will start a story and I will go back to the beginning because I forgot something. And then I will keep going, and it really bothers him. But part of being a verbal processor is you kind of have to deal with it, because otherwise I don't figure out any of my thoughts. So learning how to communicate with your significant other is really important. So how do we make the choice to enter into a relationship? Ask God. He will tell you. Once he tells you, or if he tells you to wait, you get to choose if you will listen. it is the best plan to listen. If he says yes, be in a relationship as he calls us to be. Relationships aren't for the faint of heart. Let's go to Proverbs chapter 14. Proverbs chapter 14, verse 4. It's on page 446 if you're in the Story of God Bible. So, chapter 14, verse 4. Okay. It says, "Where there is no oxen, the manger is empty, but from the strength of an ox comes an abundant harvest." That means if you want a clean barn, don't get any animals. You don't want to have hardships in relationships, don't be in one. Part of life is hardness. So, it's just kind of what you deal with. And it's a good thing, because it makes us grow. Right. Getting into a relationship is pretty easy. Staying in one is hard. It takes work. How many of you have grown taller? How many of you had growing pains when you were getting taller?
I have growing pains right now.
Growing as a person in height is painful. Growing as a person in your life and your socialness, and as a person, your personality, it also is painful because it means we have to deal with our problems. A very important part of relationships is being intentional. Not just flirting for fun, but being intentional. Being forthright and honest with people. Before Alec and I even started dating, when he said, "I'm interested in a relationship with you," I said, "Give me 3 days and I'll pray about it." And I took those 3 days. God told me to. I argued a little bit and I went, okay. Then we had a conversation. We went to Keys and we had food and we talked. And I said, okay, we're either going to end up married or we're gonna date. We're gonna break up in 6 weeks. These are my deal breakers. What are yours? Because if we're not going to end up being married, I don't want to waste yours and mine time and emotional energy. Because being in a relationship is a lot of that. So have that honest conversation first. Before you get far into a relationship, I know a number of people who get married. A woman that I know, her and her husband got married. They weren't husband and wife when they got married, but they were afterwards. They got married. She never wanted to have kids. He knew she didn't want to have kids. They got married. He wanted her to have his kids. She didn't want to, so they got divorced. He wouldn't change his mind. She wouldn't either. Figure out your deal breakers before you get that far. Have those honest and open conversations. What do you do once you're in one? God calls us to do everything to the best of our abilities. Meaning, be in a relationship how God tells us. Just like we talked about last week, it's agape loving people. Those are choices, not our feelings. It's being trustworthy. If I'm not trustworthy for my spouse, our relationship will not last very long. Because I am supposed to be his partner. And if I am not trustworthy for my partner, that's a really terrible partnership. Communicating. Learning each other's communication styles and letting their communication style be okay. Speaking the truth in love, learning how to disagree, have hard conversations, being able to compromise, working things out and growing together. We all grow at different rates, and that's okay. Sometimes I have a personal growth spurt, and sometimes Alec doesn't. And that's okay. Not meaning that he doesn't have growth spurts, but I have growth spurts when he doesn't, has them when I don't.
Me too.
Being teachable and willing to be wrong is really important. No one is right all the time as much as you think that you are, I promise. I am wrong all the time. So are you. Humility is really important. You are right. I hurt your feelings and I'm sorry. This is what I'm going to do next time. This is how I'm going to work on this. That is so important. And doing that will help your relationships to last, whether it is a romantic one or otherwise. Try it on your parents. They'll love you a lot in that moment. I promise. As I mentioned earlier, boundaries are really important. Physical, emotional, and social. Pick your point of physical boundary and stick with it. Your significant other will also have boundaries, I would hope, and let theirs be okay also. Emotional boundaries. If you are not going to be in a relationship with someone, don't intertwine your hearts together, because it's probably going to hurt a lot when that doesn't work out very well. Social boundaries, making sure that you have relationships outside of a significant other. Having connections with people is important, whether it is friendships or romantic ones. But the more you have them, the more times you're in a relationship and then break up, what is the right word for this? The more you do that, the more it wears on your soul. And the harder it is for you to be healthy in relationship. It takes a little piece of you every time you're in a relationship. No matter how physical you are, it takes a piece of yourself. Because you change, and it hurts, and you have to work through things, even with friendships. When friendship breakups are sometimes harder than romance breakups. But be aware of who you're trusting and trusting parts of yourself to. I have best friends and I entrust parts of myself to them. But I still have to be wise in my relationship choices. Now that we've talked about dating and relationships, we're going to go into our small groups. If you want to return, Ben.
Thanks so much, Kathryn. Everybody, we're going to jump into small groups. So small group leaders, go ahead and come to the front.